Certainly glad to have you with us right here on Curiosity, Not Judgment. Welcome in. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
So, last week's episode was entitled, Do I Have Value? We were talking all about the perception that people have of us, of our job performance, of the way that we do things, and that need to be valued by other people, and what happens when we don't sense that value is there. So, staying in the same theme but shifting slightly, we're going from our value to others to our internal values and the things that we deem to be personal values, and what happens when you have a relationship with somebody that does not share those values.
Which by definition is everyone?
No, not necessarily.
You think there's two people that have the exact same set of values? Have you found this?
Well, not across the board, but I would say maybe of the top 10% that are the most critical values, that yes, you can find like-minded people that live in that space with you. And I'm sure there's, subsequent values underneath that are less important that people can, I'm going to say, get over, or that's not a critical make or break deal. But yeah, I mean, I think certainly that's why we have groups of people that hang out together, right? They're shared values.
Totally. And I was thinking, I went kind of family and marriage, and how I would turn it around. It's not the top 10%, it's probably 90%. Although you could talk about the top ones also. Of course, you have to be kind of in alignment on major things. When you're talking about child rearing, when you're talking about schools and those houses and money and budgets and all those things that we have major differences on. Although it's striking to me how two people in a relationship and or family members are radically different in those basic values. But I just reacted when you said, do you have shared values? I think by definition, everyone is a little bit different in their values.
Absolutely.
And so your question was, how do we get along with people who don't have the same shared values? And I guess that's how do you get along with everyone who have different values than you.
Right. I can think, without going too far down this rabbit trail, about a few values that to me are not make or break deals, right? They're not going to compromise relationship. They're not going to cause me to get into an argument with someone. And certainly there are some very strong values that I hold that I would deem to be much more important. And if someone doesn't align with me in those particular values, it might impact, am I willing to do business with them? Am I willing to be in, a deep, intimate relationship with them, in the sense of, am I going to share my heart if we don't share and align on values? And so I think these are questions that we all have to ask ourselves, and everybody's temperament probably will put them at a different place on the scale about their comfort level of misaligned values within relationships. But it's something that's certainly been top of mind for me this week.
That's really interesting. I mean, if you think about that, and you said a couple of really interesting and important things there. I value a white car in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where we have intense heat and sun in the summertime. Am I going to not do business with someone because they drive a dark colored car? No, right? That doesn't rise to that level, like you say.
It doesn't impact you.
No. But there are other values where I might, and then talking about relationships, I can tell you that right now in my life, in this season, I very much value people who are on the other opposite or seemingly opposite on many things. I've never found anybody who's completely opposite. There's usually large overlaps, and I usually make a game out of trying to find how much those are when someone says that they have total different values with me. I value very much in my life having great, trusting conversations with people who have different, say, political values or thinking on a given subject that's happening in the world of politics. And that's a big deal right now. When you think about in the last few years, we have had families who literally don't talk to each other now because of a president or because of a vaccine.
Right.
And literally have split them so that they don't even talk. And that's family members, let alone friends and groups and people that you associate with. And, is that appropriate?
I would think, back to a year and a half ago, whenever we started on this journey, that this likely was the catalyst for us doing this podcast, writing project, etc. at all, because I think we've experienced independently and maybe even collectively being in a situation where somebody who does not have the same values has shut down conversation or shut down relationship because they can't get past the dissimilar values. And so I hope that we continue on this journey of curiosity, not judgment, to really pose these questions in such a way that you're considering them in your space and in the role that you play in family, in business, in community, to step back just for a moment and ask those questions. Am I taking offense at somebody's dissimilar value to the point where I am not open to continuing to dialogue, or I'm going to totally shut down relationship? And you mentioned vaccines, you mentioned the election, and yes, I think this has been a hotbed over the last 2-3 years of this kind of contentious spirit where there seems to be even a promotion of me versus you, my position versus your position, instead of having honoring conversation, curious questions, and facilitating relationship despite those differences.
And I think, we've talked about this before, but back in the 80s, the author Stephen Covey, who came up with 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and Principle-Centered Leadership, talked a lot about conversations that we're having. And he talked about conversation versus dialogue. Mm-hmm. And if you remember how it goes, the conversation, and discussion in particular comes from the same root of Latin of concussion and percussion, and it really means to beat each other over the head with ideas. That's a discussion. Whereas a dialogue is come from dia logos, which means meaning moving through. And how do we get to meaning moving through versus beating each other over the head with ideas? And I think the start to that is to have a curious mindset or motivation where it says, or approach that says, we are 2 intelligent people. Mm-hmm. You've come to obviously a different conclusion than I have, or a different value, mm-hmm. or a different value set. I'm really curious as to how you got there. Mm-hmm. What sets of environmental things, what sets of data, what experiences do you have that has led you to that set of values versus the ones that I espouse, or the ones that I value, the ones that I portray?
Yeah. An example comes to mind as you're saying that. So I've seen this play out in a couple of different families. So let's say there's a family who has a very traditional American diet. And the student, a child in the family in middle school or high school, sees a documentary or sees something that compels them to want to try vegetarianism or veganism, but they're still living in their parents' home. So you've now got a clashing of values. So the student who wants to not consume any animal products, but doesn't necessarily have the ability to provide for themselves food and to cook in a manner that's in agreement with the new value, how does a parent honor a child in wanting to explore and experience a different value than is one that's prevalent with the home? And I can think of several other examples, but this is one that just maybe comes to mind right away that maybe a lot of families can relate to.
It's such a great one because I think that teenagers by definition are trying to find their own way, which is often different than their parents, and almost by definition there's my old joke, there's 3 ways to get something done: do it yourself, delegate it, or tell your teenager not to do it, right? And so and it's funny, I'm thinking about a story right now that happened with my youngest daughter, who was college age at the time, and we were sitting on the couch watching a documentary called something sick, and at the end the guy was saying you should juice, right? And so we looked at each other and said, let's go to Walmart and buy a juicer. And we did. And I still juice, right? And so we made that together. Now, but what you're bringing up is what happens if there's a clash, right?
Yeah.
And what happens if the student comes up with something on their own and says, okay, I demand that we all be vegan, right? Which, isn't reasonable in a household. So what do you do, right? And I think that you've got a choice there. I mean, our rule was always, look, you eat what's served at dinner, or make your own, we're happy for you to do that. There's resources here, make your own. But if they don't have the ability to even go to the store and purchase stuff that would help with that, what do you do? And I think that's a great opportunity to sit down as a family and say, okay, you've decided that you have this value. It's out of alignment with the current values of the family and how we eat, but it's not something that we need to, it's not opposing it unless we let it turn into that. So how do we accommodate everyone here?
Yeah.
And this is a very good microcosm of how you exist in the world, because we all have these things that we would like to promote, our own agendas that we would like to get out there.
Certainly.
And how do we do that? How do we have influence that falls short of, my goodness, it was Martin Luther King Day yesterday. Martin Luther King was probably one of the best at this. He just said, look, how do I influence a nation that's now at odds with each other? And I thought, what a great example of how to do that. How do we take something, let's back off from violence, let's back off from extreme rhetoric and trying to hurt each other, not even with our fists, but with our ideas. How do we get to a place where we can value each other and have that as the core and then move forward? So I think this may be a nice recipe. We follow Martin Luther King's vision and his strategy, which is, okay, let's back up in that situation to, okay, we all need to eat in this family.
Yep.
We have prepared meals together. We value that as a family. We want to have dinner together every night, if that's your value. And so how are we going to accommodate the different needs of the different people?
Yeah.
Right? That aren't just taste.
Sure.
I remember my mother would, I didn't like tomatoes. I liked tomato sauce, but I didn't like tomatoes. Well, her spaghetti had chopped up tomatoes in it. And my dad was like, well, son, if you want spaghetti in this house, you'll eat it with chopped up tomatoes because that's the way your mother makes it. And it's like, okay, fine. But my mother used to sneak off and strain my my sauce from my tomatoes. That's just it was a funny accommodation for me. And by the way, eventually we got over that. I think I was 3 or 4, right? By the time I was 7, it was not a non-issue. But I think she was being accommodating, right? She was the peacemaker in our family.
Right.
Different people have that role. In any family, there is a peacemaker.
Sure.
And so that person is going to be the one who's going to say, hey guys, how come we can all just get along? What can we do here? Let's do some mild accommodations.
Right.
Let's not try to, throw out everything, because that's not practical either.
Yeah. So I think that's really something that I've been thinking on, is what is our role in parenting, or maybe even in business, to accommodate someone else's value when it's not the same as your own. And so in the case of a parent, you may have some additional expense of buying some foods that are atypical to your normal grocery purchase, right? And you have to make that decision. Is this contrary value something I'm willing to support monetarily? And is it something I'm willing to support in a change in our routine and our way of buying? But there's other examples that maybe are a little bit more serious, or a little bit more, have stronger consequences perhaps. Am I willing to support a value that is contrary to what I believe to be healthy, good, and right for my child? Maybe your child develops a nicotine addiction because of vaping. And would you pay money for them to buy new cartridges when you are opposed to them using the product, but they've got a very physiological addiction issue now? Things like this. And I know that early on in our season, we had talked about, adult children addicts, and what do we do with I'm going to say, not accommodating the addiction, but accommodating them as somebody that we love dearly, that needs help but they're not willing to step out of the, or they can't step out of the place of addiction. And so, there's lots of examples that you could probably generate as you're listening to this and thinking about things in your own situation about somebody I love or somebody that I work with or somebody, that I'm in relationship with has an opposing value. And what responsibility do I have in accommodating that?
And you bring up parenting, and the three rules of parenting that we've discussed before, which is, you establish a set of guidelines, and every human being needs a set of guidelines, whether you're at work, whether you're in a family. We just got to have some common set of rules for things to function properly, right? So you establish those very clear rules, and then you establish consequences, very reasonable consequences that fit the crime, so to speak, for those, and then enforce them consistently, which is the hard part over 18 years from the case of a child or more. But then the last one is we love you no matter what, right? And that unconditional love that follows all of that. And there's a version of that that's very close to that in business with support and challenge. But I think that's the key is what are those expectations? And as the folks in the family grow, I think it's okay to renegotiate. But if you've got a curfew because you really believe that, bad things happen after, 10 o'clock at night and my middle schooler shouldn't be out past 10 o'clock, and you set that rule, and then the middle schooler says, well, that's not fair, my friends all get to stay out later, that's something that you can discuss. And it's a great way to talk about problems like that people are going to have their whole lives, which is, how do I influence the system?
Yeah.
With my value is I should be able to stay out till 11, and I want you to accommodate my value. This is my new value, and I want you to accommodate it. Well, then let's sit down and have a discussion about it. Yeah. How can I feel comfortable with you now staying out to 11 versus 10? I didn't come at that value, taking the parent's role for a minute, out of anything except your protection and your good. And the child saying, yeah, but it's now good for me that we modify that value. Can we have a conversation about that? And I think we should always be open to those conversations.
Absolutely.
Where do you go from there?
Well, so I think we're accustomed to, or I hope we're becoming more accustomed to the notion that we really need to engage in conversation and family. But there's sometimes when it's a systemic issue and you can't engage in conversation around a misaligned value. And I can think of a situation that happened early to my husband and I. On a date, we went to the zoo. And I didn't know this at the time, but my husband was really opposed to zoos. He feels like we should not be caging animals. They should be, in their natural habitat. And furthermore, we should not be paying our tax dollars to support a zoo, at the cost of, in some cases, millions and millions of dollars a year. You get a big zoo like San Diego Zoo. I have no idea how much it costs to run that establishment. So I'm guessing 20 million a year, whatever. That people are supporting. Taxpayers are having to support something that's contrary to his value. And so who do you dialogue with about that?
That's interesting. It's a very good one. I hadn't thought about that. And knowing your husband, I can see that value very clearly, and I respect it. Understand it completely. I will tell you, having been involved in the city, that the zoo doesn't cost money. It makes its own money. However, if you're going to use the zoo as this is a nice family outing, we're going to subsidize the admission for families in poverty, then yes, we start using taxpayer dollars. And boy, using taxpayer dollars for things that I don't value is that is a great can of worms to open.
For sure.
But that's why we vote, right? That's why we get involved in the process and lobby for what we believe is the good use of taxpayer dollars. I think that there's very little, I don't think you're not going to find very many people who agree totally on the use of taxpayer dollars. But I love the example because it's legitimate. And so, first of all, let's go through the scenario. First of all, your husband needs to make clear that this is his stand. You don't wait till you're in the middle of the zoo and say, I hate this. What are we doing here?
Yeah.
Right? And then
It
second,
was young love.
well, I'm just saying. So then second is okay. How do I respond? Okay, well, let's as a couple decide we don't go to zoos. Right now, do we want to take the next step of making sure that our children never go to a zoo? Right? As a tribe, we don't appreciate zoos, and then do we then go and advocate for the closure of the zoo? Right? And so there's a whole, I guess there's a level of dialogue, and this is something maybe that comes up here. What are we passionate about, right? What are we as individuals passionate about? And I think it's okay to have things that are put on our hearts, things that we just have to get involved in when we hear about it.
Yeah.
You know, look, I care about cruelty to animals better than, as much as anyone. Well, some people might argue that, because am I willing to spend my own dollars supporting the SPCA, volunteer at the local shelter, and go out with a sign and protest if I see some kind of cruelty, not buy certain products because animals are used. And so there's levels of how we act out our values, and I think that's where this meets, the rubber meets the road. At what point do our values? At what point do we feel the need to act on our values?
These are interesting questions, and as we have said many times over, we're not necessarily here to answer the questions, but to pose them in such a way that you start thinking about these for yourselves and consider: is my stance, is my value system, is my hard line in the sand going to prohibit me from having relationship with people? Does it impact my employment? Does it impact my parenting ability? Does it impact, the world around me as I engage with people? I do want to shift for a moment to workplace values. And I know we've touched on this briefly in the past, but I'm not coming up with a great example off the top of my head, aside from maybe a training category that maybe you value very highly, being given the opportunity on a yearly basis to learn more about your trade, and you want to have the company pay for some sort of a continuing education process within your employment sphere, but it's not a value of the company, and they say something akin to, well, if you want it, go do it, but pay for it yourself. You've got a clash of value, and yet is it a make or break deal for you to continue to stay in that place of employment? And maybe some people might feel so strongly that it is, but I think that's where you have to start asking some of those questions.
Sure, and again, the thing that I think where you have to start is, okay, am I going to bring more value to the company having learned this? You might think, of course, yes. The employer may differ, right? And think about the expense. I want to sign up for this course that's $10,000 a month. Okay, so where do you draw the line? I think so. Making basic assumptions. Again, asking the questions is the important part. I want to go to this course. No, we don't feel like it's okay. So, do we in general not support continuing education in our fields in this company? I think so. Starting and asking those questions, because you may get the response, no, we value that. We just don't value the thing that you're trying to sign up for.
Right.
And so then, okay, then what are the things that you value? Well, we value either a formal certificate to your degree or for your degree, because we believe that that's what's going to make you more valuable to the company and make you produce more, because after all, we have employees are in a position to make more to the company than the company spends on them.
Yeah.
Right. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. So how do we broach that subject?
This, again, you said earlier, opening up a can of worms, and I can start thinking about small business and sick leave and, paid time off for other occasions. And you may have a very strong value, like this is what I want to see out of an employer, and a small business cannot accommodate it. It is not maybe not that in theory it's not a shared value, but in practicality it's not a shared value. And so yes, this has the potential to be a much longer conversation. We are just about up at time for this particular episode, but I'm always curious to hear back from our audience. Have there been scenarios in which you have found just a conflict over values where you felt like you've had to walk away? Maybe it's from employment or relationship. What has been that key value that you could not continue on down that path? And maybe after you've been listening to this for some time, Are there some questions that you're now asking? Could you go back and re-examine that situation and ponder? Is there a way to re-engage in relationship, asking some different questions and finding a way to continue to value one another despite a misalignment in values that you share? And so, big questions, I get it, but that's what we're here for. Curiosity, not judgment.
And I would just say, is the overlap of values stronger than the one or two misaligned values, and are they really misaligned? I think those are also fair questions to ask, because I think a lot of people assume value differences when maybe they're not there.
Yeah, that's a good place to start. Well, shoot us a note if you've got something to share, curiositynotjudgment.com. And of course, if you are friends with us on Facebook or you watch this on YouTube, you're of course welcome to leave a comment. However you want to do it, we would like to hear from you. So until next time, have a great week.
Take care.